Coogs House. All right, kind of a lot to talk about this Wednesday. There's a bowl game coming up. There's a basketball game tonight. Oh, and did you guys hear the Cougs got a new quarterback? What?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan, just a hater can stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you get the latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making us your first listen of the day. Welcome back to YouTube channel. That's how you found us today. If you haven't, make sure you go check us out on YouTube as well. That way we can see each other. Hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. When we get 250 subscribers, we'll be giving away a free Marcus Sasser t-shirt. It's the graphic design, the old throwback look. We had the artist on a few episodes ago as a bonus episode, so make sure you can check that out as well. Anyway, we're giving that away at 250 subscribers. So when we get there, A, you got to help us get there by hitting subscribe. And then B, once we get there, we give it to someone who comments a lot. So make sure you leave a comment on the video today. If you can't think of anything to say, tell us what kind of bread you like to put your peanut butter and jelly sandwich on. So in today's episode, we're going to kind of scatter all over. First, the breaking news of the day, we're going to talk some about Donovan Smith is the new quarterback, or at least the newest quarterback in town for Houston. He transfers in from Texas Tech in the portal. We'll break that down in the first segment. Kind of take some preliminary looks at what that means going forward for the Cougs offensively. In the second segment, we're going to look some at starting to preview the Louisiana game, the bowl game, I should say, the Independence Bowl against Louisiana Lafayette. This would be like a very bit of a tease. I got more information in that segment, but this will be kind of a tease. And then the third and final segment, we're talking about the basketball game that is tonight. McNeese State is not the toughest team Houston's played by any stretch, but it is a basketball game nonetheless. We need to preview a little bit. And frankly, I still think there are some things that they need to work on in that contest. However, let's talk about Donovan Smith. So the big question heading into the bowl season after that tough loss to Tulsa was what's going to happen on offense for the Cougs next season, right? Houston is moving into the Big 12. That means Big 12 caliber defenses. We know Holgorsen has coached in the Big 12 before, right? He was at West Virginia. We also bluntly know that this air raid system, whether it's Kingsbury or Leach or whomever, can do well in the Big 12. But who's going to be taking the snaps and executing it? That question might have just been answered with transfer Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith transfers in from Texas Tech. Donovan Smith was originally a 3-star recruit as an athlete. He's a dual-threat quarterback, never since the word. 6'5", 215 pounds. I guess he's graduated high school from up in the Panhandle area at Wolfforth High School. Am I saying that right? Wolfforth High School. He spent a lot of time, though, at Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, Nevada. At Bishop Gorman, which is a big nationally touted program, he was a wide receiver and backup/wildcat quarterback. They did use him to throw the ball some, but it was not a whole lot. At Tech, he kind of has stepped in twice now to replace guys with injury. This season, he got some extended run. And bluntly, if the name sounds familiar, it's because he beats Houston at the start of the season in a Texas Tech Red Raider uniform. Now, that Bishop Gorman High School in Nevada, I think, he threw 6 passes one year, 8 passes the next. Eventually, he gets to Friendship High School in Wolfforth, Texas. I guess misspoke a second ago, where he throws like 328 passes in his senior season before eventually heading to Texas Tech. In high school, though, whether it was Bishop Gorman or in Friendship High School, he was a big-time running threat, a one-cut runner, meaning he makes his read at the tackle or makes his read at the edge or whatever, makes a one-cut and gets upfield kind of guy. A big, strong runner, not quite the size of the Josh Allen, Cam Newtons of the world, but a similar running style for sure. He, in his senior season in high school, had 96 rushing attempts for almost 500 yards. It's good for about 5 yards a carry. While he was at Texas Tech, they rushed him a lot more this season, especially in games where he was kind of in a rotational spot. He was getting more like 2 yards a carry at Tech this year. If I'm going to be honest, it looked like to me that's a lot because teams kind of knew oh, when 7's back there taking the snap, there's a lot better chance that this is a run play, right? And kind of loading the box and those kinds of sets. At one point earlier this season, as the Texas Tech quarterback, he led the Big 12 in passing attempts, completions, yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. And so that's why he eventually gets kind of rotated out there. He did suffer somewhat of an injury, it looks like. The severity of that, I think, is unknown. All indications are that he's very, very healthy these days. He gets to Texas Tech, I guess I should point out, because his father, DeAndre Smith, was the running backs coach up until the December of 2021. He got initially fired with the staff cleaning out. They asked him to come back. He briefly, said he's come back before he eventually got picked up by the Brian Dable New York Giants staff. And so, obviously, no connections to Tech left. He played a season there. Isn't going to get to play as a starter there anymore. So he decides to come down to Third Ward. Last things on his recruitment, it sounds like the big selling point to him was the family atmosphere that Holgorsen's got. He said he felt like they were already welcoming him as a family member before he'd even really set foot on campus. He came down and took a tour. Had a couple other offers and a couple other things in the transfer portal. Always looking around as well. But the family vibes in Houston is what he got that he really latched on to. I think it's interesting there is that's not the first word I'd associate with this program, but I'm glad that that's something he found and likes in Third Ward in Houston. I think that what's interesting to me is more of the X's and O's fit. He's a brilliant athlete, big, strong, fast, good arm, and frankly, I would argue does a decent enough job, even though he had those interceptions we talked about, of reading defenses. I think, if he had 8 interceptions thrown as a starter this season at Texas Tech, and I can already, just in pulling up clips and highlights and things like that, and getting ready for this episode, I found 3 of his interceptions where he's getting hit while he throws, right? That's not going to be his problem, hopefully, at Houston. Houston's returning a lot of their offensive line talent, unless something crazy chaotic happens. They lost some of the younger underclassmen, but they're bringing in a lot of the upperclassmen that are returning. And so I imagine he's getting, hopefully, hit less while he throws. We saw Clayton Tune have brilliant offensive line pockets. He had great protection all year long. I would hope that some of that carries over as well. And so I think that it'll help chip away at some of his interceptions. The other thing is that he's getting a year older, and I think that, maturity and those kind of things, decision-making always happens. And then third and final, I think there's some sort of molding between his passing game and what Holgorsen does really well. I love Holgorsen's system in the passing game. I give him a hard time, and we'll get that in a second. I love Holgorsen's system in the passing game because it's always short throws, big gains with someone taking the top off. And so your first read's Tank Dell deep, boom, right over the top. If that's not there, your second, third, fourth reads are not check downs. They're intentional crossers, intentional rubs, intentional sit downs and zones where the ball only has to go 5 yards. Ball only has to go 8 yards in the air to then turn into a 15, 20-yard run. And that's the kind of thing that he did very well at Tech, more of those mesh patterns, the crossing concepts, the rubs. And I think that's going to translate very well to his time in Houston, assuming that Houston continues to do those. They've done that the entire time that they've had Holgorsen there. They have someone take the top off. This year it's been Tank a lot. Next year I'd imagine it's more, Matthew Golden. Someone taking the top off. And then underneath you've got the other itty-bitty concepts. They'll still will probably stick with someone Stacey Sneed in the run game. But I can't imagine, and this is my last point, X's and O's wise, I'll get on this. We have a whole offseason after the bowl game to get into this. I can't imagine you bring in a Donovan Smith and don't anticipate going to more quarterback run game. Now, you heard me throughout the season. One of my big criticisms of Holgorsen's offense in the mid-year area was that I kind of thought Clayton Tune had this weapon in his legs that Houston was not correctly using, right? Houston was having more sit in the pocket, pat, and then take off. And I was like, no, let's run an RPO with a power here and let him figure out which one the defense is going to take away and do the other one. I think he's got the ability to do that. And the handful of times we got to see him do that, I thought it went pretty well. I imagine you see more of those kinds of things with Donovan Smith because you can't take his legs away as an option. He's too elusive of a runner. He's a big, strong guy in the box, and he has speed around the edge to make those linebackers run sideline to sideline and account for him that way. He makes them play a true 11-on-11 defense. There's all kinds of highlight plays. One I tweeted out that's my favorite is he actually, in a reverse kind of scenario, goes out and starts lead blocking and is like laying a punishing pancake type block as well. He has a big run against Kansas in which he bowls over a linebacker. He has a one-cut run against Oklahoma where he makes like a foot in the ground and cuts up field, and the linebacker is like, "Where did that?" Just loses him. He's got some great tape as a runner, and I just can't imagine that Holgorsen and staff would bring him in and not want to use that. What is interesting though is that like I don't think of Holgorsen's system as being like predicated on having a runner. It just helps, right? It always helps to have athletic quarterbacks. The big myth about this thing is people want slow. No one wants a slow quarterback, right? I say to say like I'll see where this goes throughout the entire off season, and we'll see spring ball and all of that. I'm excited to see where this goes. I also, and this is my last plug in the transfer portal because we got a lot to get to today, and frankly, we have a long football offseason to cover it as well, and I can't wait to see him play in spring ball. But I will say that Holgorsen said at his press conference, media availability, like it's been like 10 days ago at this point, that they'll hopefully get a couple of guys. So A, I don't think we're done, and B, going into the Big 12, it's nice to have a guy with Big 12, experience in Donovan Smith, right? He played at Texas Tech. He beat Oklahoma. He beat Kansas, or I played well against Kansas, I should say. He beat Texas, right? He beat big time teams in the Big 12 that Houston's going to be ready to play for. He also is fallible, just like any 20, 21-year-old quarterback will be. They got Lucas Coley on the roster. He originally played at Arkansas, right? Like also a transfer in. He just transferred in a year ago. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a third quarterback added and kind of this like dual fighting for the starting spot, and then we see one of the three leave. And I don't say that it's Donovan Smith. I think Donovan Smith is good enough to get one of the two spots. And frankly, if they get more of a big arm kind of guy, the change-up of having both for a season, first year in the Big 12, could be nice. I don't think they're done, but I do think Donovan Smith is an impact player and a winner. And I'm glad to see him coming to Houston. And you guys know how much I love running quarterbacks. I'm really glad that we got one in Houston. So shouts to Hogson and the staff for bringing him on. Donovan, welcome to the family. Go Cougs. If I were a betting person, I'd probably bet on him to start game one next season. Seem very, very excited. And if you're a betting person, let me recommend going to betonline.net. Now, betonline.net is the number one source for your sports betting info, stats, news, analysis, the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from pro football to college football, bowl season, basketball. We have March Madness in a couple months, all those things at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, which it sounds like you might, you can find those on BetOnline as well, where the fastest and easy way to get your sports betting info. Head to the website today or use mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. Before we get into our second segment, I will say, in wrapping up BetOnline, they've got the Cougs at just a 6.5-point favorites. They've got the over-under set at 58. And bluntly, I think take all the things. Take Houston. Houston wins by more than 6.5. The game should go to over 58. I'm saying take all of it, and I'm saying to do it at betonline.net. All right, and looking at the Louisiana Lafayette game, the Independence Bowl on Friday, we're going to do a little bit of this today. I want to look at some of the matchups of offense and defense today. But also, I want to say that on Thursday and Friday, the one-on-one went really, really long. Andy Yanez of Gallery Sports, he and I will be breaking down and previewing all of getting ready for the game. He had some indication Donovan Smith was signing, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We'll talk football in this weird bowl offseason, quasi-offseason, and get ready for Louisiana Lafayette in a two-day show. So the first part will be coming out tomorrow. The second part will be coming out Friday. But as far as like getting my thoughts out there, I think the interesting matchup here will be the Louisiana Lafayette running game versus the Houston defensive front seven. I think of the defensive line in Houston, Sac Ave, Dot Nwankwo, D'Anthony Jones, Nelson Caesar. That's the bulk, not just because it's the heavy guys, but like the strength of this defense is that group up front. The best player on offense in Louisiana was the running back, Traylon Washington. They really do rely fairly heavily on the running game. Chris Smith is another great running back they got as well. They really ran three guys had over 100 carries out of the backfield for them. And so I would be like, oh man, they've got like a lot of guys, a lot of options. Could they wear Houston down and those kinds of things? I don't know that the line of scrimmage is where Louisiana has any success in this game. Their Pro Football Focus scores, which again in the high 70s, mid 70s, is like good. As far as blocking goes, I worry about, if I were a Louisiana fan, I guess I should say, I would worry about them blocking the Houston defensive line. What I can see happening is, to avoid sacks, they're going to really, really quick throws and really, really quick pass game, getting the ball at the edge really, really fast. And that will screw with Houston's defense some. Houston has not been great around the football, making tackles for short gains. It's kind of like a boom-bust system. The bend but don't break has broken several times, right? With that said, part of the reason I told you in the read for betonline.net to take the over is I think that Louisiana probably scores some points, especially if you're like thinking defenses in this, like, it's going to be a cold game. Tackling will be hard. I'm not joking. I'm not just saying, oh, cold in the same way that like Navy was cold. It looks like it's going to be like 20 degrees in Shreveport, Louisiana on Friday, right? It's during the day, not at night, but it still looks like a frozen tundra type of game for all intents and purposes, especially relative to the Houston schedule. That makes tackling hard. It's not snowing, not sleeting, so you can probably still throw the ball, and that makes tackling hard. The other thing is that Houston's offense, while Louisiana's defense has scored very well in Pro Football Focus, bluntly, that's kind of been the strength of their team. They score really, really poorly when you see them play the Florida States of the world, when you see them play even Rice. Louisiana Lafayette lost to Rice, and their defense struggled some in that matchup. Houston beat Rice. It was ugly, but it did happen in the Bayou Bucket Bowl. I would probably liken Houston to somewhere between Rice and Florida State. And in both of those games, the Louisiana defense had trouble, in Florida State especially, in preventing the big play. The McCaffrey kid at Rice had a nice game against Louisiana Lafayette. And then Florida State just had Power 5 speed that kind of took it away from them. Florida State, just a couple weeks ago, actually, it's probably close to a month ago at this point. That's 11-19. Yeah, about a month ago at this point. Just beat them 49-17. Houston is not technically a Power 5 team until a week from now, when the season's over. But as a team with aspirations to be in the Power 5, and bluntly, Florida State was not the 1980s and 90s Florida State this year. It wasn't the Jameis Winston Florida State either. That's the kind of team that I think is more comparable to Houston than Marshall or Troy. I guess Troy also, for what it's worth, beat Louisiana Lafayette. What I think is interesting about this bowl game is that, I think it's going to be a high-scoring, fun one if you are okay with the shivers, and people looking very, very cold. I wonder if Dana Holgorsen still wears that same ball cap with the Coug hand paw on it, with his hair flopping out the back, or he has some sort of a beanie. I could see him also just wearing a glorified garbage bag. He seems to care very little about what he looks like. Love you, though, Dana. So what I can see all of that happening is, what I was getting at, I guess, is that this bowl game is between two teams that, if you had told them in August they were playing in the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana, would have been pissed. Houston had high aspirations this season. Houston had, coming off a 12-2 year. Bluntly, don't have to play Cincinnati UCF in the regular season. Couple, Big 12 games before conference play to kind of get you ready for Big 12 next season. Kind of went in on a high note. Clayton Tune's fifth-year senior. Tank Dell is probably going pro at the end of the year. Update, he is, right? Louisiana Lafayette kind of building off of, multiple double-digit win seasons in a row. Yes, they lost their head coach to Florida, but you were thinking like, hey, we can kind of continue to ride that momentum and keep this program building. Both teams are disappointing in the win-loss column this season. That probably means you have an ugly first quarter with someone seizing momentum at some point. And I guess if I'm a picker or a better of sorts, I'm thinking that momentum shifts to Houston, either on a punt return to Jace Rogers or Tank Dell or someone that's got some speed back there. And over the top throw to Matthew Golden, Sam Brown, Stacey Sneed maybe making a reappearance as a running back. Recent graduate Tajon Henry is eligible to play in the bowl game. I can see those kinds of speed things happen in a way that shifts the momentum to Houston in a way that, like, at some point you see Louisiana Lafayette kind of shut down on the season. Bowls are weird like that. I'm pleased to say that Clayton Tune and Tank Dell are playing. It frankly would be very easy and understandable from this vantage point if they decided not to a while back, right? Tune is looking to get drafted, and frankly, he doesn't need to get banged up in this game. He has had a clean pocket all year, but he doesn't need to take a bunch of big hits in this one. Tank Dell has played through a number of different injuries this year and is going to the NFL draft and is going to be a first 3-round draft pick. He's got graded in the second or third round on most major sources. I think both those guys have a lot of money on the line playing in this game, but they're using it, A, as one last chance play for Houston. The Tulsa game freaking stunk. Let's just be honest. That's not the way they want to leave Third Ward. That's not the way they want to leave the program. And B, it's a chance for them to improve their draft stock on national television, right? Is Louisiana Lafayette the bowl game they wanted to play in? No. There was very real and very appropriate expectations to be playing in a New Year's Six bowl. And I say very appropriate because no matter how many times Dana says, oh, we didn't put those on ourselves, they were appropriate. And we're not. And so now we're playing Louisiana Lafayette, and that's where it's going to go. What I do think is interesting, though, is we'll see how it pans out. We're talking, like I said, to Andy the next 2 days to kind of talk some specifically about getting ready for this game and what the Cougars have been up to in getting ready for this game, what this game could look like. We also get to hear a clip from Dana, and so that's all a ton of fun. I say that to say that that's where the next couple of days of coverage are headed. But today, if we're looking at like what's happening on campus today, Houston plays McNeese State at home in basketball, coming off of a big win at Virginia over the weekend. Now, it's first of all, it's a doubleheader, and so we're going to talk about the boys' game today. We should also go check the girls out beforehand. They're having a fun season as well. It's not top 5 in the country is fun, but it's a very, very strong program building over there as well. So just come in, grab a seat. I'm sure that it won't be full. It's holidays and it's almost Christmas, and grab a seat, stay in a seat for both games. As far as Houston's men's game against McNeese State is not very good. McNeese State is 3-9. Their wins are against non-Division I champion Christian, Northern Iowa, and nearby Lamar. Now, that's not to say this is not a game where Houston gets some work. They do have a couple of guys worth keeping an eye on. Jonathan Massey's from Houston Legacy High School. He's kind of a bulldog guard for them at 6'4/6'5", depending on which listing you're looking at. Trey English is a great shooter for them. He shoots well, going side to side, kind of the Rip Hamilton model, going off screens. Christian Schmade is a 6'6" big, and I wrote big in my notes because, like, honestly, he's like the closest thing to a true big they've got, but he's closer to like slightly larger than Tremont Mark in size. And he is aggressive, and I'm sure in high school he was a phenomenal basketball player. In playing at the Division I level, he's going to get dwarfed by the J1 Robertses, by the Javier Francises, by the Reggie Chaney's, Jarris Walker's. He's just going to have trouble finding the basket. Again, I'm sure in high school at 6'6" as a post player, he was phenomenal. He's got crazy good energy, great length and bounce. And frankly, between he and Massey, again, the Houston Legacy product, both guys play incredibly hard for a team that's not very good. And I think that's something to be said about that. Like, they bring the energy each and every night. They'll come to Houston ready to play. Just doesn't seem to matter. They're just not a great basketball team. The thing that I think that Houston uses game to work on, though, and obviously Sampson always say anyone can beat you, show up to play, right? He's the coach. He needs to say that. Kudos, power to him. The thing I'll say they need to work on is you'll see a matchup zone. And we saw at different points of the season when Houston's not hitting 3-point jump shots, a zone really, really slows them down. And I would encourage, if I'm the coaching staff, for them, obviously, shoot the threes when they're open and take it, but to find other ways to score, to continue to work on and use this almost as a practice, to find other ways to continue to score by attacking in ways that don't rely on the 3-point jump shot against the zone. And man, totally different story. We obviously know we have the athletes to drive and kick and get the defense punctured and spinning and so on. Against the zone, when they're kind of packing it in, Virginia doesn't run a zone, they run a true pack line, which is a little different. But I want to look at, like, how do we get Jarris Walker at the nail in the high-low, right? How do we get J1 Roberts to get, like, squared up at that mid-range post and, like, able to get to his left hand going downhill? How do we get Marcus Sasser freed up along the baseline? How do we get Jamal Shedd getting downhill when there are 3 guys in the paint because it's 2 threes? Like, how do we get those things going? What actions can we do to get those things going? Because you're going to see zones in conference play. You're going to see zones in March. Heaven forbid you play Syracuse on a day you're not shooting the ball very well, right? And so those are the kind of things that I think Houston's got to use the McNeese State game to get better at, because A, it's the level of competition where they should be up 20 relatively early and getting all the way down. Like, Ryan Elvin might get first half minutes. Okay, that I think he should get first half minutes. I have said before, and I'll say it again, he's a rotational player on like 100 Division I programs. He's just playing at the best one in the country. But I say that to say that this is kind of thing where, like, Houston has to find things to qualitatively get better at, because the quantitative scoreboard stuff, it's kind of out the window, because it's a game that you can just win because you're better. You're going to get great defensive play and stops and transition baskets a lot. And so I feel like in the half-court setting, to find stuff to get better at, it's going to be really, really important. I wonder if they mess with some lineups and see some lineup stuff. I mentioned earlier this year, one lineup I want to see that Sampson has not done is to go to a 3-big lineup with Jarris Walker at a small forward, air quotes type, to then get J1 Roberts, the power forward, and either Reggie Chaney or Javier Francis at the 5-man. I think that's a dangerous-looking lineup. And frankly, there will be times they play really big teams, because as good as Houston is, they don't have a 7-footer, and you might want that. So I hope to see that at some point. As you're watching the game, make sure you tweet me. If you're watching and getting ready for bowl season, make sure you tweet me at Painsworth512. It's PAINSWORTH512 on Twitter and Instagram and all the various social media handles. I'll be happy to talk all things Cougs. That's as more guys enter the transfer portal and coming to Houston. That's as more guys are talking about the bowl game. That's as more guys are talking about UH men's basketball. I'm ready to talk about it too, so make sure you find me at Painsworth512 to talk all things Cougs all the time. I'll also talk Rockets, Astros, sneakers, whatever you want to talk about. I got it. Let's do it. Find me. We'll talk. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, I'm going to recommend Locked on Rockets. Jackson's running a great show over there. They got Alicon on this week. Alicon's a great, like, as great an X's and O's guy as you'll find. So make sure you go tune in to listen to that show for your second listen of the day. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked on Cougs, primarily Locked on Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs. Got a quarterback.